off me. I want to see what's going on. What the fuck is this shit? Who the fuck are you, lady? Why the fuck did you hug my head? Welcome to You Guys Podcast. I'm Rob, that's Liam. And this week we watched Dogma, released in 1999 and directed by Kevin Smith. The film with an all-star cast is about two angels trying to get back into heaven and prove God wrong. The only people that can stop them are the last descendant of one of Jesus' siblings, a black apostle, two stoners, an idea that becomes a stripper. Now, if you have trouble with the concept of this film, then fret not, as you're not the only one. Although a box office success upon its release and is now deemed as a cult classic, Dogma has been the subject of controversy since its release, mainly due to it being attacked by religious groups over its subject matter. A fact not lost upon Kevin Smith, who as a Christian himself famously protested his own film. He joined a group of protesters outside of a screening, reciting Hail Marys, waving anti-dogma signs, and even gave an interview. The Catholic League has denounced Dogma as blasphemy. Now, if you like to watch the films before listening to our episodes but had trouble finding Dogma, you're not the only one. The film's distribution has been somewhat held hostage due to rights issues with the Weinsteins. But if you manage to watch the film or have any type of memory of this film, I welcome you to what I believe will be a great episode of our podcast. Now, controversy aside, I adored this film growing up. I thought it was clever, funny, and edgy. And although my feelings have changed somewhat on the film, it doesn't stop this being a great film in my eyes. Now, this may have something to do with the fact I'm a self-proclaimed atheist, but I believe it has more to do with the characters, the writing, and Salma Hayek as a stripper. If I didn't say it enough last week, it is possibly one of the best things to ever hit cinema screens. Liam, I know you said you thought fondly of this film in the early aughts. How are you feeling about it today?
Yeah, I still really like it. I find it actually interesting that you like it because you're an atheist. I actually think if you take away like the hardcore, I don't see why there's any reason why you wouldn't love this film
That's
if
what
you
I'm
were
saying.
a Catholic, for instance.
I'm not saying I like it because I'm an atheist.
Oh,
I'm saying,
I see.
is that why I liked it?
No. Well, that's the thing. I think this is a very, very Catholic film. It's obviously irreverent, the tone, but it's always respectful. And it's never like, you laugh at Christianity, but it's coming from a person who's clearly entrenched in the religion and who's trying to make sense of it.
His podcasts, his interviews, anything he ever says, he always comes back to the fact he had a Catholic upbringing. Mm-hmm. I love the fact that you say it's respectful. Can you imagine replacing a symbol? Like they just turn around and go, "Oh, by the way, your religious symbol, the crucifix, no longer exists. Meet Buddy Christ." So I don't know if it's Christ very respectful.
I think it is like I said, it is making fun, and the word that would keep coming up is irreverent. But there's always a sense of love. Like it feels like Catholicism's in on the joke, and that doesn't speak to all Catholics. And I'm not a Catholic myself, so maybe I'm completely off. Comment. Sorry, what's the word I'm looking for? Off point here.
Yeah.
But this isn't like a satire like, Life of Brian. It's not a send-up of organized religion. Dogma is clearly written by someone entrenched in Catholicism. It's like somebody trying to make sense of it at the end of the 20th century. And if it is a satire, it is a satire that's as respectful as it is irreverent. I really do believe that. The whole plot is predicated on the rules that dictate the religion. Like if you don't buy into the whole fact that, the core plot is you've got two angels, and if they get into this church and they, go against God's will, then it's the end of the universe. That's super deep Catholicism. Like all the characters are basic. It's like a deep cut comic book movie, only with Catholic characters. That's what it really is. And if you look at like the setup of this film, it does feel more like a kind of like comic book style fantasy action comedy. That's how I describe it, only with religious figures instead.
I totally agree on that. I mean, Kevin Smith is a big comic book fan anyway. He's massive in it. So you can feel the comic book elements within this. What I do like is what this film gave me more than anything else is the knowledge of the word or the phrase dogmatic law, because I never understood it beforehand. I've never even heard of it before.
Have you not? Oh, so this did you a favor. So if nothing else, well, that is the thing. You can argue that, like, on the one hand, you could actually kind of, even though it's right in your face, I'm not saying like it's a subtle religious text or allegory, like it's very much in your face. But if you don't want to like interact with the religious side of the story and just take this as, again, a work of complete fiction, you can still enjoy this film. Like it still goes along at a decent clip. Like you do, like like how much you want to interact with the controversy or anything else is completely up to you. Like I watch this film and I'm not really watching it because I'm a Catholic or because I'm not a Catholic. This hasn't changed my tune on religion in any way for or against. I watch it because the dialogue's great. It's relatively well written across the board. It's got great actors. It doesn't all land. It's too messy. It's got far too much exposition. Despite the fact that they're all brilliant, it definitely has too many characters. But it's still fun. And I think the important thing is this still feels like a Kevin Smith movie.
Yeah, I totally agree. It feels like a Kevin Smith movie. You watch it because it is a Kevin Smith movie. Taking the religious element out of it aside, which you really can't because it's the whole. But yeah. But I appreciate what you just said then about it has too many characters, because as a Kevin Smith fan and as a fan of this film, I had a question that might feel like blasphemy. My question being, did this really need Jay?
Well, you've just quoted Jay.
I quoted Jay. I love the quote.
I think it. I feel. I think it does. I feel.
I just don't know if it felt like there's too much Jay.
I actually quite like Jay, and I think he does cut through. Again, one of my biggest issues, and maybe more than the fact there are too many characters, is because it's so plotty and because it's so intertwined and entrenched in Catholicism. It means it feels the need to explain itself over and over again because you've got characters like the Metron, the Last Scion. Like none of these, even if you are a Catholic, unless you're a really hardcore Catholic, a lot of casual Catholics should be like, I don't know what the Metron is. I don't know what the Last Sign is, unless you're going to church every week. A lot of these characters aren't like common knowledge to most people. No. I mean, Rick even make a joke about it when he shows up, and I am the Metron. Like, God, you don't even know who this is. So
you know how I know
the need. Sorry, just to keep explaining itself. So you run into these long stretches of exposition, and sometimes it needs Jay to come in. And I thought you actually picked it. I would have never thought to use that quote, but it's brilliant. At the end of the film, you have all this exposition. God shows up, and you're like, "Fuck, there's a lot going on." And Jay's like, "What the fuck, lady?" Just like he's like literally the voice of the audience at that point.
No, I like Jay in this film. I just wondered if there was because of the exposition, because of the nature of the film, then it goes to what is ostensibly a dick and fart joke with Jay. And I wonder sometimes, did it need it in certain scenes? Now, I think you did need Jay in this film, but as much, I suppose, should I say? I mean, you definitely needed him at the end. I thought that was fantastic. The why the fuck did you hug my head thing, I think is great. You need him at the beginning, the whole prophet thing, and also when he's driving the car and he goes, "What the fuck do I know about shifting?" But
yeah, he really does have some of the best lines, and I actually think it's Jason Mewes' best performance in a Kevin. So I think he's legitimately very good in this film.
It is his best Jay. Do you know what? I'm doing a you now. You've convinced me. We need Jay in this film more.
Well, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say my issue wasn't with Jason Mewes. I actually thought there was a weak link in this film, and you might not agree with me at all. I actually thought it was Jason Lee. I think he might actually be a little bit rubbish in this film.
He's not the best in this film, is he?
He's really not. Like his line delivery isn't great. It feels like it's from a different film, and maybe because it's like you said, this still feels like a Kevin Smith film. But a lot of this dialogue does feel slightly elevated by the fact that it's like you've got actors like Ben Affleck, like Matt Damon, like Jesus Christ, Salma Hayek and George Carlin, who's great. What's that? Sorry,
you didn't say Alan Rickman.
Well, Alan Rickman being the obvious one, I do apologize. Who all got these amazing line deliveries, regardless of how ludicrous the actual dialogue is. And then it gets to Jason Lee, and it's maybe a bit unfair because he's often left on his own. And a lot of his stuff is exposition. He's explaining to those three little demon kids. What he's really doing is explaining to the audience. Yeah. And it's quite boring. And I actually think the weakest scenes in the film are the ones that involve him. The one at the bar at the end of the film when he's explaining why it's the end of the world, why he doesn't want to live. That is like it doesn't help that it's the worst action sequence in the film as well. So I actually thought Jason Lee is easily, while required because Azrael has to be in the film from a narrative perspective, as a character and as a performance, I didn't like him in this film.
Yeah, and I think it was an acting choice for that because he says it at the end, and I think he took it too literal. He says it at the end. I learned from too many Bond films, you don't give away the whole plot.
Yeah.
So he was trying to be a Bond villain throughout this entire film. The whole dressed in white thing, the way he acted, the overacting in certain cases, the stupid line about central air being gift from God, whatever that line was.
That didn't really work for me, that line at all.
No, and it's just now, but I now understand why. Because I always wondered why, if he's a demon and he's
Yeah.
raised in the fires of hell, why he needs air conditioning. Then you won't realize it's because he's come from heaven, so he's not used to the heat.
Yeah. And the thing is, to come back to us, it's like, and we mentioned it in the Mallrats podcast, like a lot of, as much as I like Smith's dialogue, and it is fantastic throughout, it's always stagey and performative. It belongs in that viewer skew universe. It doesn't belong in the real world in its own unique way. And I think you do need good actors to pull it off. And he was quite good in Mallrats. And obviously, I can't remember the name of the other actor who I thought was genuinely bad in that film, the kind of joint lead in Mallrats.
Oh, Jeremy London or
Yeah. I thought he and quite a lot of people in Mallrats actually weren't very good at delivering Smith's dialogue. And Jason Lee was good in that film, and he's not terrible in this, but all of a sudden he's alongside, let's be clear, much better actors. And he just, I don't want to say he stands out like a sore thumb. I just thought, when I'm looking at this cast, I'm like, who could go? Because there were just too many of them. I'm like, yeah, it probably would be Jason Lee, but he's up. What the fuck, man? He's up against Matt Damon, Ben Affleck,
and the problem is,
it's a tough.
Who do you put in that role then? Because although Jason Lee doesn't really deliver against everyone else, you still need somebody to be the Azrael character. So
you've got to have somebody in there.
So I'm wondering, so I mean, does anyone do it better? Is there somebody that can?
Well, the obvious one, as great as he is, it's like you could. The thing is, as much as I love Alan Rickman as the Metron, I love Salma Hayek as Serendipity. I love Chris Rock as Rufus, especially Chris Rock as Rufus. I think is actually maybe quietly the MVP of this movie. As great as like Alan Rickman is, for instance, he's not actually in it as much as you think. He's just that good that you remember him. But
whenever you think of Dogma, you think of Alan Rickman being
central. Well, it's like all my favorite lines. Like, what are you going to do? Hit me with that fish? And that's not a direct quote. It's close. But and just a bit at the end when God blows up Ben Affleck's head. It's like it never ends. He gets like a drop of blood on him. But what I would do is ostensibly I would remove one of those characters because I don't think you need all three of them to help Linda Fiorentino on her journey as Bethany Sloan. Yeah. So I would remove Alan Rickman's character as the Metatron, and I would have Alan. I know it seems an obvious choice because of his history with villains, but I would have Alan Rickman playing Azrael, basically.
I think it kind of overshadows then, and Alan Rickman as Azrael, you'd need more Azrael. I don't know.
Yeah, but I wouldn't. But that's the thing, though. You're getting less character development on the Bethany Sloan side because you don't have so many characters. So you arguably have more time for Azrael. And of course you have more time for like I have no issue with more Azrael if he's being played by Alan fucking Rickman. It's like, like that's one of the issues of this film. As great as Alan Rickman is, it's like I kind of want him in this more. But then what do I do? Like, do you drop Salma Hayek as Serendipity? You kind of can't because you have to have the dancing. You have to. I'm like, I can't remove Rufus because he's so relatable in a way that the other characters aren't. So I'm like, for all my talk, I don't know who you get rid of. He's kind of painting himself into a corner. So eventually, I kind of have to force the issue by getting rid of Jason Lee, bringing Alan Rickman across to the bad guy side, and have just Rufus and Serendipity doing the explanations. And
I think, for me personally, I think you keep Alan Rickman as Metatron. But I don't know, from my point of view, then I don't know who you would have as Azrael. You do, but I don't know. You needed more from Azrael. I don't want to say the word character development, but you do need something more. No, Azrael.
I just thought like his line deliveries, they just felt a bit. He's not terrible in this film. I just thought it felt a bit flat, but it is what it is. But like you said,
those kids as the hockey stick demon villain guys were just pointless as well.
They're just plot. They just needed somebody in a certain place to do things on their behalf without him kind of coming out of the shadows. So I get it. I like the fact that they didn't talk. I like the fact that they have hockey sticks. I love all the the jersey stuff. I love the fact that God's obsessed with skee ball, for instance. I love the fact that Azrael and Bartleby have been banished to Wisconsin, and it's like as they're walking through the airport, you see like the dude with the
guy with the cheese head.
There was a guy in my work who went to Wisconsin. He was a fund manager, went to a business meeting in Wisconsin, came back with a cheese tie. And I was like, oh, go Packers. And he was like, what do you mean? I was like, well, the cheese heads because of Wisconsin and stuff. And he's like, oh, I thought it was just a cheese tie. I was like, yeah, it is, but it doesn't matter. I just gave up on it, on explaining it. So, the cheesehead joke in the background is, I got to be honest, something I don't think I ever noticed before. I was too busy questioning where he got that fucking popcorn from in the cinema, but It is what it is, I suppose.
Well, yeah, I mean, maybe he took his own popcorn. I don't know.
Mhm.
But this is because this was 99, so this is when people could just go to the departure lounge
Oh
or the
yeah, yeah.
arrival lounge and just watch people arrive from
Yeah, this was
planes and
like the
stuff.
last, bastion of kind of glorious air travel where you could go
Yeah.
right up to the gate without a ticket. You could fucking get on the plane, sit down, just leave. It was unbelievable back in the day. I just never got to travel enough to really appreciate it. But what I find interesting, obviously you mentioned at the top the fact that this was so controversial. And I had totally forgotten that it had a disclaimer at the start, for instance. And I
I
was
did
like,
as well. Because I
would
thought
it,
I watched some sort of special edition until I
yeah, same
discussed with
here.
you off pod, and I was like, we forgot that disclaimer. Sorry,
Yeah, yeah.
interrupted you.
Well, the disclaimer, for instance, I thought it was really interesting. It's basically telling folk that this is not to be taken seriously. That I thought, oh well, look, back in '99 to offset the religious kind of zealots, you had to kind of give this disclaimer, like, oh, this is a joke, calm down. And I was like, well, no, nothing's changed. If anything, it's got worse. Like, I'm not sure if you watch much stand-up comedy, but a lot of it, I watched the most recent Ricky Gervais a couple of days ago. And like his last couple of specials, half of the show is him basically justifying making jokes. Like that's sadly the world we live in now. It's like, just in case you're not getting it, this is a joke. Dave Chappelle has to constantly defend himself because of everything that's going on online. So we live in the same world. And I was like, would this film be as controversial now? And I had to imagine what this film would look like in 2020, 2024 now. So it's like, if you had the same film written by Kevin Smith, so budget, but say it was starring Timothy Chalamet and like Tom Holland, and it was going after, quote unquote, going after, because I don't think it's really going after Catholicism, as I said. I think you can read it that way, but I think it's really, in its own weird way, quite celebratory of the religion. Would it be controversial now? And the answer is, yeah, it fucking would be. It absolutely would be. There's really is little difference. If anything, with the internet and everything else going on, it would be a bigger deal, sadly. I'd love to tell you that we're all a bit more sensible nowadays, but no, we're fucking not. Sadly,
Oh,
the internet's
God,
ruined
no.
that.
God, no. It would absolutely. I mean, the fact that I don't know if we said this on or off pod, we had trouble finding this film. I know I said in my intro, you
Mm-hmm.
couldn't find this film anywhere because of the distribution rights. But
Mm-hmm.
I also think is that down to the fact of I'm not saying the Catholic Church holds sway over how this film is
No,
getting
oh, you
distributed, but
I'd like to think that the Catholic Church is in no way associated with, Harvey Weinstein. Like, no, this is a money grubbing thing. He wants to sell the rights to this movie for like 5 million, and that's too much money for a movie which didn't make a huge amount. And unbelievably, the budget for this film was $10 million. Like, how the fuck did he make this film with that cast
not
for
yet.
$10 million? It's
With that
insane.
cast. I'm pretty sure he got Affleck as a Friends deal,
Oh, 100%.
which brought Damon in as a Friends deal because
And
he's
it makes all the, but it does remind you that, right? He's not a fancy director. In the same, people would be like, you compare Kevin Smith to Clint Eastwood, but Clint Eastwood is famously not fussy. He just puts a camera in a place, gets his shot. Like, I think Kevin Smith almost certainly does more takes, and he's quite precious about the dialogue. But even if you go back and watch Clerks, like, yeah, they're not showy shots, but he puts the camera in the right place. They're handsome looking films. And it's not just the fact that, oh, this is a movie with Ben Affleck and, all these names because he's friends with them, basically. And that's the only way you can do it for 10 million is get them on mates rates, ostensibly. But this is a good looking film for the most part. Like, there's very little to kind of, even to show its age, beyond like the CG shit monster never looked great. And it was like, they should have always.
And it really had when it threw its own shit at the
It
walls,
just didn't work.
Yeah.
I actually don't like the whole shit. I'm not against scatological humor for the most part. I just don't think it worked in this film. The only thing that really ages it is having like hoodies under suit jackets. Like that's really the only big thing.
Is the angel dress code apparently. But I want to go back though, just quickly. You said about he probably does more takes than Clint Eastwood, but
yeah.
I mean, if listening to, and I've listened to a lot of Kevin Smith, I listen to his podcasts, I used to watch his interviews, and I want to say the word famously again, but famously, he has said his mantra is that'll do. So
yeah.
he'll do a take, that'll
Mm-hmm.
do, he'll move on. Now, what I don't know if that is before or after the weed.
Well, that's my big issue with Kevin Smith is the weed thing. And Because I know some people have criticized him for since going quote unquote woke. And I'm like, dude, did you not watch Chasing Amy? That was woke before it was like a bad term, before it was that was a film about a lesbian, about a friend who was secretly gay for his friend. This was back in 1997. By any standard nowadays, people would be like, that is an incredibly woke movie. You can make arguments about the fact that the girl kind of ends up with, like, does he make her straight? I can't remember exact details. But needless to say, it was pretty, going against the grain back in 1997. So I don't buy into this whole idea that suddenly Kevin Smith's films have gone off the rails because he's woke. I think that's a nonsense. What I do think is that The Weed did impact his directorial style and where he went with the stories, because after Jay and Silent Bob, Red State was good as well. His comedies in particular, they just didn't land for me. Like, I was really looking forward to Jay and Silent Bob, the reboot in particular, because I was like, I love Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. I was like, the idea of them rebooting their own movie, I was like, oh, it's really clever. I watched it. It was terrible, man. It was really bad.
So he joined, and this is going to be interesting over his next couple of films, because he joined the Weed Nation, as it was, in 2008. Zach and Mary Make a Porno.
Is that what it's called? The Weed Nation. So fucking lame.
I hope it's not, because I just made that shit up. But Zach and Mary Make a Porno, because again, he was with Seth Rogen, who was a big advocate for weed, and that's when he started smoking. And you could see that then in his films after. I believe you can see a notable change in his films.
I think you can. Yeah,
but
I think you totally can.
As of 2023, he's now stopped. He's totally cut it off. So now he's going to give us things. I can't remember the name of his next film set in New Jersey.
He's doing another Jay and Silent Bob film, isn't he?
So he's already written one that's set in the 80s. I really can't remember what it is. But now he is writing for Jay and Silent Bob film. So
which I'm looking forward to. And I'll always give him the benefit of the doubt. As I said, it was just like, I don't know, like it felt like his films went off the rails. And because I was similar to yourself, I used to listen to a lot of his podcasts, but they started to get a little bit too self-congratulatory for my taste, and it was just a little bit too much.
Kevin Smith's biggest fan is Kevin Smith. He loves talking about himself.
I don't mind that, and that was always a shtick, but he just kind of tipped over, and it was like an element of him smelling his own farts and me listening to him doing so for an hour. I was like, I don't know, I can't really feel this. And the big problem was I wasn't kind of connecting with his movies anymore, because I was a massive fan from 94 or whatever it was it 94 Clerks? Yeah, 94 Clerks, 95 Mallrats, 97 Chasing Amy, 99 Dogma, and Silent Bob Strike Back in 01. I was absolutely on board. Like, he was one of my favorite directors for that kind of 6-7 year period. And I've liked some of his films since, for sure. Like I said, I liked Red State. I actually, Clerks 2 and 3, Clerks 2 in particular, Clerks 3 was okay.
Yeah.
But a lot of his other stuff, man, his misses have been fucking rough, man. Right?
Oh, yeah.
As I said, him as a persona, I certainly started going off pretty heavily. But, I'm willing to be, it feels like he's changed his tune a bit. Obviously, he had the heart attack, and I'm sure he doesn't give a shit about my opinion. But, like I said, I'd be more interested now to see what he does next than I say I would have been 5-6 years ago, for sure.
You never watched Tusk, did you?
No.
That's an interesting one.
I am kind of interested in that one, because I remember them talking about it on the podcast and then turning it into a film.
It's funny, but I don't know if it's meant to be funny. And it turned a lot of people like. I had a great time watching that film. Would I go back and watch it again? Probably not. But
I wouldn't be. I'd like put it this way: I'm in no rush to watch that film. I wouldn't be averse to watching it if it was on TV, but I'm in no rush. I mean, again, it spoke to that kind of period of like the Boys Club and should we make this film for shits and giggles? And it just never really landed.
So his next one, the one I couldn't think of the name, is called the 4:30 Movie, and it's about a group of teens in the 80s spending the day theater hopping. So you're gonna get. You're going to get and that's what I thought then, because you're going to get the exposition that Kevin Smith is famous for, because as they're theatre hopping, they're probably talking about the films they're watching. And if you're thinking about the 80s, depending on the 80s, what are the films they're actually watching within that? Because Kevin Smith is a massive cinephile as well. So, like, what are the films?
Yeah, I mean, this is the only movie in history which directly references Crush Groove, for instance. That just doesn't happen in
Crush Groove. What was it? History will win on that one. Or whatever.
Wait! You want to make a bet from the guy who said Crush Groove was going to be bigger than E.T.? He's like, fuck you, because time's going to tell on that one.
Time's going to tell. That's the one.
Because that is the thing. Like, when this film was released, it was often criticized, and it was because of the cast, that this was like Kevin Smith's play for the mainstream.
Yeah.
But I don't think it ever lost that element of, as I mentioned earlier, of what makes a Kevin Smith film. It's kind of like how I thought the Coens were totally unfairly maligned for intolerable cruelty. And it was for the same reason. Everyone's like, oh, well, it's got Catherine Zeta-Jones and George Clooney when they were at the height of their powers. It's like, you know, well, it's obviously the Coen brothers going for that mainstream hit. It's like, yeah, you had those two actors in it. And of course, they went on to work with George Clooney a bunch of times. And even before that film, in fact. But it still felt like a Coen Brothers film. If you went back and watched that film, it's like, this isn't them making a mainstream movie. This is just a Coen's brother film with a slightly fancier, more mainstream, quote unquote, mainstream cast. And it was the same with this. Yeah, it's got these big names, but if you go back and rewatch it, the dialogue, everything is like, no, this is pure Kevin Smith. This isn't like diluted. And the fact that, like I said, you make arguments as to whether he is or isn't going after the Catholic Church. He must have known that there was going to be a backlash. He must have known that this wasn't going to make $100 million at the box office. And it turned into a relatively decent hit because largely, because the budget was so low. I think it made like 38 million. And I think it's actually the biggest viewer skew movie in terms of sheer box office. But, you know, I don't think he probably suspected, because the names, it was going to make a bit more than, say, Mallrats, Clerks, Chasing Amy. But, you know, I don't think he diminished his writing style to kind of go, oh, well, because I'm chasing $100 million. I don't think he did that at all.
Oh, God, no. He kept true to Kevin Smith. He just went a bit more. I don't want to, like, because his films are usually, I want to say realism. Like, it's all about the talking. It's about a day in the life. Like, we spend.
Well, it's weird, isn't it? Because we mentioned it earlier, like the fact that it's realism because he wants to capture how like friends talk, but it's in a really strict, stringent way, because he famously says like he doesn't want people to ad lib. He wants them to deliver the lines as they are on the page. Yeah. So that's why it kind of comes back to this viewer skew universe. It does have a naturalistic, like, oh, this is how people talk. But there is that stagey element where it never quite feels like real life. And that's what I think actually adds to the magic, that it feels like Kevin Smith's universe. And again, people are like, you're comparing Kevin Smith to Quentin Tarantino. It's like, fucking settle down. It's like, Quentin Tarantino's films have this great dialogue, but they don't quite belong in our world. They belong in Quentin Tarantino's movie world.
Yeah.
It's the same with Kevin Smith in a different way, but it's like the dialogue's there. It's always fantastically written, but it doesn't quite belong in the real world.
I mean, the difference between Smith and Tarantino is how I grew up and the films I watched and things like that. I can feel the way they talk, or the subject matter that they talk about, I've talked about, just not using the same language per se. Like, I don't go into full off. I mean, I don't go into full exposition about films and all that. I usually go, oh, this is shit, or this is good, or one word answers from me. What makes this perfect, our little partnership that we have. You do a lot of the best intros. You talk about the cinema and everything like that. My intro is just usually...
You say best intros. Make no mistake, you missed out on an absolute treat, listeners, because for the Lost podcast for Violent Night, Rob made up a song. And the thing is, he kind of bottled it halfway through. He started singing it, then he kind of did William Shatner-esque spoken word. So while it's disappointing that you guys didn't get it, we're going to do Violent Night next Christmas, and Rob is going to sing the whole fucking song next year, but it is an absolute belter for sure.
I turned that 3-verse song into 6 verses, or you can't make me sing the whole thing.
You absolutely have to sing the whole fucking thing, dude. It's a masterpiece. A masterpiece. Sorry, I derailed your point there. I do apologize.
No. But so I this is why I feel more grounded with Kevin Smith films. I appreciate we talk more about Kevin Smith as the person, as the director, as the auteur, than we have about Dogma. So we do need to bring it back to actually the Dogma podcast.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about the film. And the one thing I just have to bring up is, how did you take the digs at John Hughes? Because the whole conversation, again,
I had this written down. And literally, can I read my notes?
Yeah, go for it.
When they started going on about John Hughes, I went, ooh, Liam's not going to like this.
Well, the thing, no, because I couldn't decide, because like the way they're talking about Shilma, Illinois, and he's like, all the ladies are top shelf, all the guys are whiny little bitches. Except for Judge Nelson. That guy's the fucking bot, obviously. But I was like, oh, but it's still kind of on the right side. It's obviously, celebrating the fact that they're in Chicago for a brief period of this film. And it's an excuse, basically, it's a genius excuse for Jay and Silent Bob to meet them on their journey, because they're traveling down from Wisconsin towards New Jersey, which naturally takes you through Chicago. But then later on, they also have another dig at Home Alone with Serendipity, which just comes out of nowhere. And so I'm like, wait, does he like John Hughes films or does he fucking hate John Hughes films? And again, I think his relationship with John Hughes in this film comes across as like a microcosm version of his relationship with religion in this film. It's like he obviously has this connection. It was a massive part of his youth, and he's trying to reconcile how he feels about it. But this isn't a John Hughes film. This is a Catholicism film, so he doesn't have enough time. But similarly to Catholicism, by the end of the film, I couldn't quite make my mind up how he feels about John Hughes.
I think he loves John Hughes. I'm sure he does because he mentions it a lot again.
I assumed he would, but it was the additional dig about Home Alone.
That's the thing, because I couldn't remember that part either. Like when he's going on about John Hughes, they've watched all these films. This tubby bit, I can't remember the film he says when he says I can't even watch this.
Pretty in Pink, is it?
Is it Pretty in Pink? Or it's not 16 Candles. It must be Pretty in Pink. I can't even watch it with this tubby bitch crying all the time.
There's nothing worse than watching a fat man weep.
Yes. And then you've got all that, which is fine. And then, as you said, she goes, I'm responsible for 19 of the top 20 grossing films of all time. That one with the kid and that somebody sold their soul to the devil for that piece of shit. I'm like, whoa. Yeah, it is great.
It's weird. But to bring it back, like, obviously we're being quite facetious with our immediate criticism of the film. But if I look back at the film as a whole, and one of the reasons I think it works is actually the fact that he was able to get Ben Affleck and Matt Damon together. Because, what do they have? Amazing chemistry.
Yeah.
And every time they're on screen, on screen, they do elevate the movie. Don't get me wrong. Like you said, everybody, well, for the most part, most people are very good in this film. But their back and forth totally works. And even to the point where Bartleby's turn at the end of the film when he loses his shit.
Yes.
It is very abrupt, but Ben Affleck, and people can criticize Ben Affleck. Ben Affleck's a really good fucking actor. He's a really good fucking actor.
I think he's good.
And he's good in this film. And when he flips, he's good enough that I buy into it in a way that, say, like Linda Fiorentino's like, she's fine in this film. But Kevin Smith famously said on the DVD commentary that it's like the film would have been better if Janine Garoppolo had been playing her character, which is a dick move because Janine Garoppolo's in this fucking movie. It's a complete dickhead move. I actually think she's fine in this film. I think you could make an argument that, again, if you're going to make replacements, like look for somebody else, you could look there. I think she's perfectly fine, but whatever. But Matt Damon and Ben Affleck in particular, I think, elevate this film.
Yeah, I mean, they are the ones that make this film, quote unquote, great. I appreciate as well.
Quote unquote great. Yeah.
When you said about Affleck's turn, the audio medium doesn't help the fact that I just clicked my fingers and pointed at you as in yes, because I had that written down for myself as well. His turn is fantastic because he's the watcher, as they say. He's the guy that watches everything. He knows all the stories. He knows everything about everything. And then all of a sudden, he's like, hang on, no, now I'm going to be a doer because I can clearly see now what needs to be done. And his turn is great. But it's for both turns because then you've got Matt Damon, who wants to prove himself to God again by being God's wrath or wrath, as Alan Rickman says. And then he then becomes, I don't know, the guy. Oh, let's just go home. let's just.
Yeah, but that's the thing. Like, I think with a lesser actor, Bartleby's very sudden turn might be quite jarring because it isn't given enough time. Like he's, for the most part, playing his role, like you say, as the watcher, and then all of a sudden, it's like this, this gradual thing. He goes off the deep end at the drop of a hat, and all of a sudden, he's so off the rails that Loki's like, I don't know, man. Like, he's supposed to be the wild card out of the two. But suddenly he's like, listen, we're going up against God. He's the only one talking any sense. It's like, this doesn't all add up. There's clearly something going on behind the scenes. And Ben Affleck, by that point, is just blindly going down this route, and that's all there is to it. And I think it does speak to his performance that the movie gets away with it because he's not actually dealt a great hand there in terms of it being on the page because that turn is too abrupt. But it gets away with it because he's so fantastic and they're just so watchable together. And in terms of being watchable together, like, I know I'm stepping on favorite scenes here, and I think both of us might come down on the pole dancing scene, but I actually adore the movie land, the executive sequence. And it's not just because of obviously them going around the table. It's their kind of natural back and forth. Like every time Loki says something dramatic, he's like, Jesus Christ, will you not give me a fucking moment? It feels like, the way guys just shit on each other. Like they feel like best friends, totally.
What did you think the head of movies did to his son. I've always wondered that.
Oh, he fucked his son. He absolutely fucked his son. I thought the way they delivered it, the way they're going around the table, and again, like their chemistry, where he's like so vile. I'm not even going to say it out loud. He whispers in his ear and just back there. He was like, "Your own son, you sick fuck."
Yeah.
It's such a great, and right down to like that one woman's like, "Oh, no, you're fine. You haven't sinned." But you didn't say bless you when I sneeze. He's like going to shoot her in the face. The whole sequence is amazing.
I love it.
Except for the door. I don't know why I have such an issue with the very 90s door with like the movie logo on it.
Yeah, but that wasn't just the movie logo. That just looked like movie's nose.
It was just movie's nose.
Weird. That was so weird. Yeah.
It reminded me of the kind of door you would see in what was the film where Al Pacino was playing the devil and it's got Keanu Reeves? I fucking love that film, even though it's
Devil's Advocate.
Devil's Advocate. It feels like the kind of door you would see in that movie, which kind of makes sense for that being a room full of executives. And all that's making me think now is that we really have to do the Devil's Advocate because that.
I mean, if we're doing Devil, because I always confuse the two devils. I don't know why, but I do. Him and Gabriel Byrne. So if we're doing Devil's Advocate, we're going to do End of Days as well.
Oh, well, that's fair enough. Oh, yeah, I do actually enjoy End of Days. Devil's Advocate is both somehow, simultaneously, a much better and a much worse movie than End of Days. It's legitimately one of the strangest movies of the 90s. But you have to.
Let's go back to the movie's boardroom. I loved it as well when Ben Affleck is just going nuts. Bartleby's going talking about everything. He goes, "Did I miss anything? You forgot Movie Magazine." And then, just like a dick friend.
Fuck, did you forget the magazine?
Yeah, like a dick friend, like we all would. I can't believe you fucking forgot that, you piece of shit. Like, I'm ad-libbing, but that's basically what would have happened. And again, you say it as well. When Matt Damon comes back into the room and he goes, "I do believe in this," and then you got Bartleby reading the magazine going, "I do believe," like rolling his eyes.
Yeah, just like it's like all lines are down. It's like, oh, like, Jesus Christ, like they just constantly ragging on each other. It's so great.
Sticking to movies, we're at the movies restaurant where they're having an egg and movie muffin, wherever that is, and they're talking, and then Bethany walks off to sit on the kids' play area.
Mm-hmm.
Do you recognize what that play area was?
No.
It's a fucking meat grinder.
Is it really?
Yeah, it's got the handle next to it. The slide coming out is where the
I was thinking maybe too much about the dog because that's actually a pretty important thing. I'm not sure if I think it's there because she has that moment with Rufus and then he's talking about the fact that he's met God. And I think that was the thing that really convinced me that this was a director trying to get his head around what Catholicism means to himself. Like he says, mankind got it all wrong by taking a good idea and building a belief structure on it. It's better to have ideas. You can change an idea. Changing a belief is trickier. People die for it. People kill for it. It's like, this is a man trying to level with the religion that he was brought up with. And that seemed really cemented that for me. So I'm thinking about that and you're like, that's a fucking meat grinder. But yeah, there's like a bunch of signs throughout the film. And quite often it's actually Chris Rock delivering it. And Chris Rock's, I think, a really interesting comic actor because obviously he's done a handful of the usual, I'm a comic and I end up doing these like, the lead in a comedy. Like you get, Kevin Hart's done a whole bunch of them. Will Ferrell's done a whole bunch of them.
Yeah.
He's done a few, but he started with like New Jack City. And even he did in fairness, in Lethal Weapon 4, there are moments when he is legitimately just delivering stand-up material. It's just an excuse for him to deliver stand-up. But he's had this like really interesting career where he's never quite fit into a single box. Most comic actors, they're forced to do their comedic chops. And it's like, you're going to be the lead of some big, dopey, usually bad comedic movie. And then eventually, Will Ferrell tried his hand at more dramatic roles. It's like from day one, Chris Rock was combining dramatic roles with those comedic ones. So he was never kind of, you're just the funny guy. And he's had one of the more interesting cinematic careers of any stand-up I can think of. Like the closest thing to it is maybe like, I don't know, what's his... I can't think of his name. Move on. Sorry, I can't think of his name.
I want to go. I love it, right? You just said then you were thinking more about Chris Rock talking about the religious elements and everything, and I'm going on about the meat grinder. More for that scene. I'm not even thinking about him going on about the message and the religious delivery and all that. I always think about that scene because I only just noticed the meat grinder this first time. I always think about that scene when he goes, "You wank more than anybody on the planet," and when you do it, you're thinking about guys. I always think about that.
But that's the thing. It does have those.
Not all the time. Jay delivers. one of the perfect lines after that, we're on the train and he's asleep and they wake him up and he goes, I didn't come in you, Pete, I swear. Jesus
there's always that one friend who you all suspect might be a little bit gay. We've all got one. So, but it was Robin Williams, by the way. I just couldn't think of his fucking name. But yeah, he does have one of those careers, and obviously he's never hit the heights in terms of dramatic roles that Robin Williams did. But I think he's had a closer career to that than, say, your Kevin Hart and stuff like that. So I just wanted to finish my point. And
that's okay.
You know, just a name just won't come to you, and that's one of the problems with not editing this podcast. Like if I'm fucking floundering, it's like it's going into the podcast. God damn it!
I can't be asked going through every minute of this podcast. What happens is what happens.
Oh no, what happens. But yeah, like it's just one more last point on the whole idea, how important Catholicism is to this movie. You know, if you want any idea of it, you only have to read the synopsis. This is the genuine synopsis of this film. So the story revolves around two fallen angels who plan to employ an alleged loophole in Catholic dogma to return to heaven after being cast out by God. But as existence is found on the principle that God is infallible, their success would prove God wrong, thus undoing all creation. The last scion and two prophets are sent by the Seraph Metron to stop them. I mean, it doesn't exactly sound like a hoot, but it does show just how Catholic-centric and how true to the religion the core plot actually is. I mean, if you remove the shit monster and the swearing from this movie, it could genuinely be one of those, like, you know, the religious hits you get in the US that you never hear about over here. It's like, you know, if you see like the US top 10 list, you know, for the cinema for any given month, there's always like one movie you've never fucking heard of over here. And it'll be some like religious movie, which obviously just doesn't play outside the US. Like that's what it sounds like on paper. It sounds like a proper church movie, for lack of a better term. It just, as I said, so happens to have a lot of swearing, a shit monster, and Salma Hayek doing a pole dance, which we're gonna have to talk about at some point.
We will get to it.
We can save that. We can save that for favorite scenes, I'm sure.
It is gonna hit your favorite scene, but not for the reason people understand, or people are guessing. What I liked as well, you're on about the religious elements of everything. The random little, I don't even want to say hint or anything, just the throwaway line when Asriel's at the end and he's got them all locked up and he's given his "I'm a villain, I'm winning" speech, and he goes, "Let's put the TV on," and Jay says, "Put on Davy and Goliath," and us in the UK probably don't know what Davy and Goliath is.
Davy and Goliath.
Davy and Goliath.
Not David and Goliath.
No, Davy.
What the fuck's Davy and Goliath?
It's a show from...
if you need any proof that people in the UK do not know what that is, I am it. I have no idea what... When you said Davy and Goliath, I was like, there's no way he just said Davy and Goliath. There's no way you think... I literally thought for a moment there that you thought, you went your entire life thinking it was Davy and Goliath rather than David and Goliath. I was like, holy shit, man, this is going to be a moment, but I do apologize.
No. It's a show that started, I think, in 1960, and the last one was in 2004. About a boy and his dog, the synopsis, right? A young boy and his talking dog learn lessons about life.
Sounds awesome.
Yeah. But it's more against the religious...
Which again, you need that moment because that, as I mentioned earlier, that's one of the worst scenes in the film, and it's all Asriel. Like, in fairness, it's pretty harsh on Jason Lee that he's got to deliver all that exposition, but that whole scene is quite clumsy. But then it's completely, even though when they go to the church, there is even more exposition. Linda Florentino, they're all delivering exposition right up to the end of the film, which I don't think is ever a particularly great sign. But Ben Affleck and Matt Damon immediately cut through that because they're fantastic. And of course, the fact that God shows up and it just happens to be Alanis Morissette. And I don't know why, but Alanis Morissette is a completely convincing God. She's just really good. Imagine like that is your first cinematic role. Oh, who did you play first? Oh, it was God. That was my first cinematic role. And
you go, of course you were. But I love her as well because you've got God there. Mm-hmm. The all being almighty, and then you've got Jay going, well, who the fuck are you, lady? Like, what the fuck is going on? And
well, yeah, it's because he clearly knows in that
God
moment.
As well is funny. And you've already said it, but when Metatron tries to wipe the blood off using her skirt, and he's like, so fuck, did I just do that with God? And then she looks down and she just changes into that weird silver outfit. The whole scene at the end is very charming.
Yeah, it is. And as I said, like you do have those moments because I think Kevin Smith's fully aware that they're still somehow delivering exposition at that point. And I know it's a much more complex movie, but it's the complete opposite of, say, what we did last week when we did Battle Royale. and Kitano, and like the obviously they used the TV screen with the girl delivering. Like that was a masterclass in delivering what could have been quite boring exposition in a really entertaining way. In this movie, they never quite get over it. They kind of interject wherever possible with, you know, a non sequitur, something funny, just to kind of cut through the dialogue. But it does speak to the plot as much. And I make no mistake, I really enjoy this film. I think it's amongst his best. It never quite gets over the fact that it's still delivering exposition right through until the final moments. And as I say, even at the end, when you have all those characters there and you're like, do I really care about most of them? Not really. Could you, right, if you get away from the fact that I love Alan Rickman and obviously Salma Hayek's fantastic Serendipity, it's like, could you have just had Rufus? I think you could have just had Rufus.
Yeah, you kind of need Rufus.
Jay and Silent Bob because they connect the movie to the View Askew universe, all that jazz. I think you do need them to make this a quintessential Kevin Smith film. But in terms of on the religious side with all these characters, I was like, you could probably write it so it was just Rufus. I really think that.
Yeah, Rufus. I mean, Rufus' introduction of falling from heaven, and that would hit big whether or not you had any other character witnessing that other than Beth. So I totally agree with you in regards. You probably only need Rufus if you want to move the story forward, but you should get some great delivery from the other characters as well. So,
that's the issue. It's like, we're not going to have an answer for that. It's like, who do you get rid of? It's like, well, we don't want to get rid of Alan Rickman. We don't want to get rid of Salma Hayek. So you're kind of stuck. But from a purely plot perspective, I don't think you could rewrite this film quite easily, I think, and just have Rufus deliver the message to Beth and have the story accordingly. It makes sense to go that little bit deeper and have that connection to God with the Metron and all that jazz. I think there's ways around that, and you could streamline everything by making it just Rufus. But again, do I actually want that movie? Probably not, because I want Alan Rickman and Salma Hayek in the movie.
Here's a question for you, right? Why do they show Alan Rickman showing his Ken doll parts, or lack of, but don't show Salma Hayek doing it when she lifts her skirt up?
Well, I think because it looks bad. We talked about the fact that the CG poo monster looks pretty rough. When he pulls up pulls down his pants, pulls up his top, and he's showing his Ken doll lack of appendages, it doesn't actually look very good. I think it looks a bit rubbish. And it's like, I just don't think you needed to see it again. So I think, all right, we get the point. No need to return to it. It's like you're just repeating the same thing if Salma Hayek does it. So the fact that it doesn't actually look very good is more than an excuse as far as I'm concerned not to show it again. And plus you see more than enough of Salma Hayek in this film anyway, so it's absolutely fine.
Yeah. How do you think?
Speaking of which, sorry.
I know you said about I'm putting off the Salma Hayek part as long as we can, apparently.
Well, we'll get to favorite scene. It's fine. Yeah, we'll separate it.
I know you said about the demon not being. How did you like the way they take that demon out? You got all this big about, I'm going to summon the Golgothan. Then you got the three B hockey dudes who always make B sounds when they're around, being scared because of the Golgothan.
Well, no, I think it's flies.
Bees. Well, whatever the fuck they are. Okay, I'll go with flies.
No, it's definitely flies because of its association. Yeah, it doesn't matter. Anyway, carry on.
Buzzing people. You're totally negating the point.
I'm just saying, bro.
You go to the ship demon then, and everyone's scared of it. Apparently, it can take bullets and everything, but it gets taken out because of some spray.
Yeah, it's a cheap joke for a sequence that doesn't work. I don't like the whole Golgothan sequence. I obviously like what comes before, and I get you need a threat at that point. I would have preferred a fight with the hockey kids personally, where maybe they kind of end up running away. It's a bad joke. As I said, I'm not actually a massive fan of scatological humor anyway. I don't think it looks great. Tonally, I'm not convinced it fits in with the rest of the movie at all. So again, I mentioned earlier that, the scene at the bar with Azrael isn't fantastic because it's exposition heavy. It's not brilliantly delivered. But I also really don't like the ship monster, the Golgothan sequence. That's the other one I would pick out as like, I would cut that completely from the film and just have it. I think you need an action sequence. You need something at that part of the film to keep up the momentum. I just don't think the poo monster is the way to go. So, and no, to bring it back to your point, regardless of how I feel as to whether it should be in the film, the payoff is terrible with the whole spray thing. It's a really bad joke.
Yeah. Because there's no hint to it. Like, why do you carry this around? Because Jay farts. But that's the first and only time he does that. Like, if he was
Yeah.
dropping a couple of air biscuits throughout the film, maybe there's some sort of build up to it. But the fact that
Air biscuits, Jesus Christ, I've never heard that term. No, the thing is, I don't want a film where he's randomly farting so that you can
that's what I
have this
mean.
joke pay
That's
off
what
later.
that's what I mean. You don't
Just get
need
rid of
a
it.
film where he's randomly farting. So the
No.
fact that they just then introduce it for this joke at the end
Mhm.
seems to be pointless, in my opinion.
Well,
I
he'd
just
obviously decided, I want to have the Golgothan. Like, this is part of religious text. It's basically a shit monster. It's a good idea on paper. In reality, I don't think it works in the film. I don't think it works on a visual level. I don't think it's very funny, and I don't like the payoff
no.
at the end. So yeah,
And
it's not a good scene.
you kind of miss the introduction of the Golgothan and into why it's there. Like it's the basically all the shit from the people that were crucified on the same hill that
Mhm.
Jesus was. Because as much as I love her, bless her, Salma Hayek could not do speed exposition. Like when
Well,
she's
she
talking
actually
fast,
struggles. She's one of the people who maybe struggles a little bit more with Kevin Smith's dialogue. Like Linda
yeah,
Florentino has a few moments when suddenly it starts feeling a little bit stilted, the way she's delivering the lines. Even Chris Rock has one or two moments where the delivery doesn't quite land, but he's being a comic actor, I suppose. It comes a bit more naturally. But she has a couple of moments where it's like, yeah. And again, we're making all these jokes about like the dance sequence and stuff like that, and you got to remember when we watched this film, we were like 17 years old. It had a fucking impact to say the least. But the reality is, jokes aside, you could probably get rid of serendipity. You really could. Like
yeah.
she's fine in this film, but she's not as good as Alan Rickman. She's like, I don't think she's as good as Chris Rock. She could probably go, but then she delivers a line like, "Oh, I had something in my eye," and I'm just like, "Oh, it's so adorable the way she delivers that fucking line." And then I'm going back the other way. I'm like, "No, you've got to have her in this film." So
Yeah.
I'm obviously contradicting myself at every turn. I have no idea what to do about this film.
You've already made me do that with Jay. But it's it's when they're talking about what the shit demon is.
Mm-hmm.
Her accent is quite thick anyway, which is why I love Salma Hayek. I love her accent. But when she's trying to deliver the Kevin Smith lines,
Mm-hmm.
but she's got only a brief amount of time to do it, she starts tripping over her own words, like I just fucking did then. She starts tripping over her own words. I missed before on rewatchings of this, I've missed the delivery of what the shit demon is. I only caught it this
Oh, I
time.
see. Fair enough.
So
I'm
that's
not
why,
sure if
yeah.
that's her fault. Like it's
No,
just the
I'm
whole.
not saying it's her fault.
No,
All
I
I'm
know.
saying
I
it's
just
a
think the
lot of
whole.
line asking her
Yeah.
to deliver in such a short amount of time.
I just think it's maybe she doesn't deliver it in like an interesting way. It's just delivered flat. Here it is, and I think the problem with the whole sequence is the fact that it comes out of nowhere. It's there's no build up to it. It's like, oh, we'll have this really quick explanation as to why we're suddenly going to be dealing with this shit monster. And as I said, none of it really pays off. So yeah, it's the whole scene just doesn't work for me. And like, make no mistake, most of the things in this film do work, but it does have problems. And that is one of them. There are two scenes for me in particular, I've already mentioned them, that really don't work. Too many characters, too much plot, but it is well written for the most part. It's well acted, and it's fundamentally, I think the most important thing is that it's likable. You might have a different feeling about it if if you are truly entrenched in Catholicism and you have strong feelings about the religion. But as someone who doesn't, I watch this film and it's like it's bright, it's breezy, it's quite fun despite all the murder, especially towards the end of the film. And yeah, I genuinely think it's one of his better movies.
Yeah,
It's certainly one of his
it's
most ambitious. That's for sure.
it's definitely up there in the conversation of his better movies. And I think we mentioned it last week about the fact that this might take Jay and Silent Bob out of it, Strike Back. No, actually, include this might be one of the last best Kevin Smith films.
Oh, 100%. And
Yeah,
it's easily his best cast. I mean, you can make an argument for this being one of the best cast movies of the 90s. Like if you go through the cast, it's unbelievable, the cast for this fucking film. And if you look at IMDb, this is his second highest rated movie after Clerks. I think it might be
yeah,
joint with Clerks 2 maybe, or one of those anyway. But I would have that, in the conversation for best Kevin Smith movie, full stop, for sure.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
and I, in terms of my preferences, I'm very front loaded with Kevin Smith films. As I already mentioned, like if I was going to name my top 5 movies, it'd probably be his first 5 movies. I'm not
Yeah.
going to say the order necessarily, but it would be Clerks, Mallrats, Chasing Amy, Dogma, and Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. I appreciate that's 4 and not 5, but those would be my favorite Kevin Smith films. And this when I was growing up was arguably my favorite. You know, it was either this or Clerks. And going back and rewatching it, I feel much the same. Like, you know, we went back a couple of years ago and rewatched Mallrats, and I still feel the same like now as I did back then. I think it's one of his more flawed early movies. I don't think Mallrats, and I know a lot of people love that film, I don't think it's nearly as good as this. I don't think it's anywhere near as good as Chase. I mean, well, that's the thing. Sorry, I'm missing Chase and Amy. Chase and Amy is also very good. So it's a very different movie, but it belongs in that kind of conversation. When I think of the best, like, let's take Mallrats out of it. The best three Kevin Smith films, as far as I'm concerned, are Clerks, Chase and Amy, and Dogma, with maybe Clerks 2 not far behind.
Yeah, those films and this film, they're apples and oranges in regards to everything that to what you see on screen. His previous films, you've already said them, Clerks, Mallrats, Chasing Amy, they're a day in the life of all these people kind of film. Whereas then this becomes a day in the life of angels. Like I realized I went really high and squeaky when I said angels.
You did go very high then. But the thing is, again, it comes back to that point. Yes, it's a bigger, more ambitious movie, but it still feels personal like all those other films did, because it feels like a story about his youth. It's a more direct relationship, obviously, with Catholicism, rather than just go into the shops or something. So it still feels like a Kevin Smith film, but yeah, it's much more ambitious than his other films, just by the nature of the storytelling and what he's going for. But the important part is, it doesn't feel out of place. It still feels like a Kevin Smith film. It's still, as far as I'm concerned, slots in comfortably alongside those movies, despite the fact it has these different ambitions.
We haven't really talked about the film as a whole, just about what it means. But I think we do need to move on. We've been going on for an hour.
Well, like I said, we've been kind of tiptoeing around favorite scene for ages. So before you tell me it's Candy Girl, and obviously I'm inclined to agree, 17-year-old me would 100% agree. The problem is that sequence does lead directly into the Golgothan and the shit demon. So that's why it's not my favorite scene. My favorite sequence is actually the movie Boardroom, because I think Ben Affleck and Matt Damon are absolutely cooking in that sequence. I love they go around the table. I love their back and forth. I think that's the best sequence in the film, personally, is the movie Boardroom scene.
So it's not because of why you think Candy Girl. It was when I was 17.
And make no mistake, she's fucking smoking. She is smoking. Let's not tiptoe. Like, whatever your reason is for that scene being your favorite, if it's not her like pole dancing, she looks so great in that sequence. Like, you know, oh my god.
So it's the build up to it, and then that scene. You've got them talking about the religious aspects of it and everything around the movies center. The movies. I love the fact there's a strip club next to a kids' fast food restaurant as well, by the way. And then you have the conversation in between Rufus and Beth, and then they look for Jay and Silent Bob, and they must be in a strip club. And then you go in the strip club, and then you get Candy Girl, you get Salma Hayek, which, again, fantastic. But then when you look deeper into it, she's a muse. The dinging is not the music. The dinging is her, what's the word? Oh, what does serendipity do? She manipulates, inspires these guys to get rid of their money. And that's right. Like, it's the build-up of everything, and that's what the guys are getting rid of. And I'm trying to make this more profound than it actually is.
I gotta be honest, buddy. I'm not buying it whatsoever. I mean, it's clearly Salma Hayek dancing. And there's nothing, dude. There's nothing wrong with that. You're a red-blooded male. Don't give up to just because we were all told off for it for a couple of years. It's absolutely fine to be aroused by Salma Hayek dancing dressed as a schoolgirl.
What's really good? Fine. I watched this with my wife. He made me rewind it and watch it again because,
well, dude, she looks absolutely phenomenal. I mean, she always looks phenomenal, but goddamn, she looks amazing in the sequence. In terms of loves and hates, love number one for me, unsurprisingly, is the cast, or at least most of the cast. Number two, the fact that I don't think it punches down on religion. I know it had the whole backlash and stuff. As I said, it's irreverent, but it's never mean-spirited. I think it's going on this journey. It's trying to figure out Catholicism in that kind of turn of the century way. You are literally watching a man trying to deal with his own relationship with religion. I don't think it ever comes at the cost of the religion itself in the same way, I used this example earlier, The Life of Brian, for instance. And number three, the fact that it has a conversation about E.T. versus Crush Groove. You're only getting that in a Kevin Smith movie. It's like, who the fuck else is referencing Crush Groove? And if you don't know what Crush Groove is, watch the trailer. There is a reason that E.T. was definitely a bigger hit, but Crush Groove is at least worth watching the trailer. What an absolutely bonkers movie. Run DMC are in that fucking
Yeah,
movie. The
yeah.
second reference to Run DMC, although albeit kind of tangentially, I suppose. But those are my loves anyway.
So,
And
I mean,
so,
I want to.
sorry. I'm not going to be an ass. I'm not going to leave you out on that ship alone. Salma Hayek, striptease. Yeah, 100%. Pole
I want
dancing,
to say
sorry.
the cast as a whole, but there's like Ben Affleck and Matt Damon together can do
Yeah.
no wrong. I believe in this film. I think they're great together. Uh, Chris Rock. I was going to call him Rufus Rock. Chris Rock is really good in this film. He's basically the glue that's keeping this film on track in regards to the exposition. He can deliver the. I know you say he has a couple of trip ups, but he can deliver what's
Oh
needed.
yeah, and he's the only, I think, essential kind of character. Like you could remove James Silent Bob, you could remove the Metron, you could remove Serendipity. For the movie to work, you at least need Rufus to go on this
Yeah,
journey with Bethany. So yeah, I think he's maybe the most essential of all the characters, and for the most part, he is fantastic in this film.
yeah. And it was my favorite scene, so I'm not putting it in my loves, although we know it's there. But my third one is Alan Rickman as an exasperated angel.
Mhm.
Like he just doesn't. It's like nobody cares about me anymore. There's not been a movie made about me. Nobody knows who I am.
Mhm.
Why can't believe I got to deal with this shit anymore? Like
Well, the
I,
brilliance
I love
of
him in
Alan
it.
Rickman is the fact that he actually has quite a bit of exposition to deliver throughout this film, but you
Yeah,
hardly ever notice that as exposition because it's Alan Rickman delivering it, and his line deliveries are always fantastic. And he's such a charming screen presence. So yeah, if I was gonna like handpick anyone out of this film, I mean, Affleck and Matt Damon you already mentioned, but the other one would be Alan Rickman, I think. Excuse me. In terms of hates, too many cast members, despite the fact we can't decide who the fuck we're going to get rid of. Number two, too much plot and exposition. And three, scatological humor isn't really my thing. You know, I won't go into details again, but that whole sequence doesn't really work. And if I was going to sneak in a four, I know it was suggested that Janine Garofalo would have been better in the lead role, thus upsetting Linda Fiorentino, all that other jazz. The real issue with the film, I would argue, is Jason Lee. That's the one person I would actually look to replace.
Jason Lee would have been my top.
Mm-hmm.
I the yeah, he just didn't seem right for the overall villain, the puppet master, as it were, for this. I
Yeah,
just
he's
yeah,
just he's not even terrible. I just didn't.
yeah.
He just wasn't great. That's all.
The look of the shit demon, the whole link to the shit demon, just wasn't for me. It it didn't seem to, and it doesn't stand up now in regards to the CGI aspect of it
Oh no,
also.
that CGI bit. Actually, the ship monster. To give him his dues, most of the ship monster sequences, oh, the Golgothan is he's actually known. It actually looks okay in the suit, like with all the poo dripping off him. It looks
Yeah.
suitably gross. But you have that one sequence when they insisted for some reason or another to have him shoot the CG poo. It looks genuinely terrible, which is a shame because, as I said, the rest of the film actually looks really good.
And I don't know if it's just me, but Buddy Christ is creepy as fuck. I don't know what
Well,
it
yeah,
is
but that's
about.
kind of the point, isn't it?
Yeah, but I just gotta go with my hates because I don't know what it is about Jesus Christ winking and pointing at me.
Well, right, and that is the counter argument for me. Also, for all my talk about it being on the side of Catholicism, blah blah blah, and it not being mean spirited, the fact that he did cast George Carlin, a famed atheist, as Cardinal Glick, and
Yeah.
then introduce Buddy Christ. That we will put that in the other side of the argument for sure. And I can understand how some people might have been upset about that. And bizarrely, I actually think, especially as we mentioned at the top of the podcast, the fact that you can't watch this film anymore. It's not just a matter, it's not on a streaming service. You can't go into Amazon and rent it. You literally have to have a physical copy. And because you can't find it anymore, if you want a physical copy of this film, it's going to run you, sadly, which is a bit depressing. But it oddly means, I think, that Buddy Christ has lived on longer than the movie itself. Like
Yeah.
Buddy Christ still pops up everywhere. And I'm not sure that everyone who sees, I think people would recognize Buddy Christ, but not necessarily associate with the film. So it's this weird element, and it's quite a small part of the film. But I think Buddy Christ lives on. And yeah, that feels like an accidental pun, maybe. I don't know. Anyway, moving on swiftly. Do you have any alternative titles for this film, sir?
We do. We've only got a handful. I say a handful.
Mm-hmm.
We got three. I mean, it's dogma pretty much everywhere. But China, anger against the rules of heaven.
I like it. Big fan.
But they've got an alternative title in it, China as well. Alanis, comma S. Alan is his. I don't. Alan is his wrath offending the heavens. You're on mute, by the way. I know you're not.
Okay. Sorry. So it's not Alanis. Is like they haven't taken
Oh,
like.
fucking Alanis, dickhead. Alanis Morissette.
Yeah, don't give yourself too hard a time because it makes no sense because Alanis Morissette is playing God. God
Yes.
isn't Alanis Morissette.
Alanis'
So
wrath offending the heavens. Like I understand why that's the
you
alternate title.
sound like the sat nav having a fucking mental breakdown when I get to Wales and there's like a street near where my mother-in-law lives. And it's like it just looks at it and obviously it's like I can't do that. So, turn left onto CWDDRA. It's just like it just has a fucking heart attack. And you just had much the same with Alanis Morissette, apparently.
Since you called me out a couple of weeks ago for Kazakhstan,
Yeah, famously
I've been fucking
Kazakhstan.
up every. I'm going to stop reading these.
Okay, so is that it for all titles?
No. We got so Taiwan was anger violates the rules of heaven.
It's not Alan Rickman's speaking to God or anything like that.
No. It's anger violate, and then Vietnam, and I'm going to get this one right. Vietnam was catechism.
Cataclysm, you mean?
No, catechism.
Oh, catechism. What that?
I knew you'd call me out on this, so I double checked.
Well, yeah, because is catechism a word or is this?
It is, yeah. Catechism, plural noun catechisms, summary of the principles of Christian religion in the form of questions and answers used for religious instruction. Because I thought you were going to fuck me over with that word, I double checked it, but then I fucked up Alanis.
Honestly, I might have let that one slide if you hadn't fucked up the Alanis Morissette one. So yeah, we've come full circle. But I've learned something new. I didn't know catechism meant that.
Yeah.
See? And people say you don't learn listening to podcasts. What do they know?
Especially our podcast. You learn something new every day.
Absolutely. Yeah. Any facts for the film?
Yeah, we got a few. When Kevin Smith and Scott Mosier heard Alan Rickman was a Chase and Amy fan, they asked him to play Metatron. He read the script and came back with two questions. Would they stay faithful to the script? And were the wings real or CGI?
But well, I was very glad for the most part that they were real. Like they do go CGI and it makes sense briefly when Ben Affleck's kind of like lowering himself down in front of the church in New Jersey. I get it, but what they do wisely is they keep it a wide shot. They don't zoom in on him so it never looks too dodgy, despite the fact that if you do squint, and obviously things are a little less forgiving nowadays with like HD TVs and the usual nonsense, but for the most part, that looks okay. But when they do have the actual wings, like they still look fucking awesome.
Yeah. Jason Mewes had the entire script memorized before rehearsals. When asked why, he said it was because he didn't want to anger Alan Rickman and because Kevin Smith took him aside before rehearsal began and said he needed to be on his best behavior and bring his A game to the set.
Well, you do, yeah. If you're on screen with Alan Rickman, you can't be fucking around. I mean, he kind of has to fuck around because that's his character. But yeah. If you're going to up your game for anyone, it's Alan Rickman for sure.
So I've heard that story as well. He didn't just memorize his lines. He had the entire script memorized.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So he was telling people their lines as well.
Yeah, you imagine that, like Jason Mewes telling you your lines and you're like fucking Sam Hyde, like, Jesus Christ, he knows the whole script. Crazy.
He was so afraid of Alan Rickman, apparently. Like they had demonized Alan Rickman to him. He was like, I don't want this fucking British guy coming over and just taking me apart.
It's like, dude, Alan Rickman will fuck you up if you mess up your lines, dude. So you better make sure you're on point, otherwise you're going to be in trouble.
We mentioned it briefly, but the hoods worn around the neck of the three angels in the film, Metatron, Bartleby, and Loki, represent their halos.
Oh, I see. It doesn't just represent 1999 fashion.
No, because I mentioned when you said about it being the fashion, I said it's weird that is the angel fashion, but it's representing their halos.
Yeah, it did represent the halos, but it definitely also represents fashion at the turn of the century. Like, there's a reason they chose those, like a hoodie under a coat to represent the halos. It's just a look of that time for sure.
Yeah. Kevin Smith pursued Robert Rodriguez to direct the film. Rodriguez enjoyed the script, but in seeing how personal the story was, insisted that Smith direct it himself.
A wise choice.
Yeah,
because otherwise this doesn't, like, it needs Kevin Smith behind the camera. If you have Robert Rodriguez, I'm not saying it's a bad film, but it's a completely different film, regardless of whether Kevin Smith wrote it or not.
So the role of Loki was written for Jason Lee, but scheduling conflicts forced him to take on the smaller role of Azrael, and Matt Damon took over as Loki. So it was never going to be Ben Affleck and Matt Damon together.
Well, I mean, it worked out for the best because whatever I say about Jason Lee, it's like you absolutely, like, you know, the film doesn't hinge on it, but the film is elevated no end by the fact that their chemistry just pops off the screen right from the opening sequence. As soon as they're on screen together, you're like, oh yeah, This is absolutely working. And I'm not saying that Jason Lee couldn't have worked alongside Ben Affleck, but I'm glad it ended up being Matt Damon.
According to Kevin Smith, his first choice for the role of Bethany was Gillian Anderson.
Yeah. Supposedly she read the script and she's like, I'm not fucking doing that. Which I can imagine a lot of people might have done if they feel a certain way about religion or they were worried about the backlash. But yeah, you can imagine like he was a big fan of X-Files. And I think Gillian Anderson would have been awesome.
In the opening sequence at the airport, Gwyneth Paltrow was sitting a couple of seats away from Ben Affleck. She is never seen, however, and was only there because Affleck invited her to the set that day as a friend.
Did they date? Or am I making that up? Or
I don't know if they starred in a film about.
No, it was Brad Pitt dated her, didn't he? Sorry, I was thinking Brad Pitt.
They starred in a film about plane crash or something, didn't they? About
yeah, weren't they also in Romeo in Love? Was that the big one they were in together? Is that one? Shakespeare is Romeo in Love. Shakespeare in Love. They were both in that for sure.
Okay. Kevin Smith originally wanted Danny Elfman to compose the score for the film, but he was unavailable. Danny Elfman's score for this might have been good.
Yeah, again, though, I don't think, it's not just the look or the dialogue. Like, Kevin Smith's films sound a certain way. They've got a very unique score, usually, something which kind of puts it in the View Askew universe. This shifts away from it slightly, but it's still in that universe. If you had Danny Elfman, it suddenly feels like a different film. Like, if you're getting Robert Rodriguez to direct it, sure, get the Danny Elfman score. If it's a Kevin Smith film, I think it clashes, personally. So, as great as Danny Elfman is, I'm not sure if it works for this film.
So the last one then, Kevin Smith had Samuel L. Jackson and Will Smith in mind to play Rufus. Rufus.
Again, both of those fine choices. I'm sure they would have done a great job, but I was happy that they ended up with Chris Rock in the end. But then I'm a massive Chris Rock fan, so it is what it is. In terms of legacy, we already mentioned it, 44 million against 10 million budget, becoming the highest grossing film in the View Askew universe to date. Massively controversial, but a cult hit and now famous for disappearing because of Harvey Weinstein. We've already talked, like, is this Smith's best movie? I would argue it's in the conversation. A lot of people would disagree with me. Certainly one of the best casts of the 90s, unquestionably. Alanis Morissette's first cinematic role. I mentioned earlier that the whole lost friend things. Smith said on DVD commentary that Janeane Garofalo would have been a better lead than Linda Fiorentino, thus upsetting her. And I think she contacted him after he had a heart attack. So they've, I'm not sure if they're friends again, but they're back in contact at least. But yes, he admitted it, a dick move, and it is a proper dick move. To do that on the DVD commentary, what a fucking asshole, regardless of how you feel. You just don't do that. Already mentioned Buddy Christ lived on well beyond the movie. It introduced the movie burger, movie land, the movie character, whatever you want to call it. Movie was it a thing before Dogma, or am I making that up? I just associate it with Dogma.
No, I think it's associated with Dogma because it becomes big then later on. Like it's a massive thing within Jay and Silent Bob. Clerks 2, they're in there. But
yeah.
I think this may be the first. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong.
I think it is anyway, but anyway, I'm certainly not going to correct you. And is this the sexiest Salma Hayek dance? Is this hotter than From Dusk Till Dawn? It's played for laughs, so it's not hotter. I would argue she actually looks better, but it is what it is. It's a personal preference thing. There is no correct answer or incorrect answer, as it were. In terms of making a change, I would just, as I said, refine the plot a bit. It gets a bit too plotty. There's a bit too much exposition. It just needs to get reined in a bit. So if I was going to change anything, it would be just tightening up the script a bit.
Azrael's performance for me, just don't make him Bond villain.
It was close. It was close between those two, but if I'm only picking one, I'm going to go with the plot, but that would be a close second.
Yeah, it was a bit much this time around watching it, so I think Azrael's performance for me.
Yeah, sometimes I feel like we're being a bit harsh because I think he is dealt the worst card of everyone in the film because he's often talking to like the three fly kids, whatever you want to call them. They're not talking back. He's just delivering exposition ostensibly directly to the audience. But I'm just not in love with his performance. And I never used to have an issue with it. It was just rewatching this time. I was just like, he's just not great in this film, but it is what it is. In terms of video games, there wasn't a Dogma video game, at least one I'm aware of. The first thing that bizarrely popped into my mind were the crappy side scrollers from like the SNES era. Like, remember there was like a Lethal Weapon game and a True Lies game? And it's like, you'd be controlling, I never want to be controlling Bethany or Rufus. I'm like, it would have to be Loki and Bartleby is like they shoot and stab their way back to heaven, or you could even have it as like set like a prequel in which Loki and Bartleby had to dish out some holy wrath in God's more violent Old Testament days. I was thinking something along those lines. But in terms of a modern take on it, the game that immediately popped into mind was the brilliant but little played religious epic 2011's wonderfully named Al Shaddai Ascension of the Metron for the 360 and PS3. It was made by Ignition Tokyo. And again, this is the synopsis. Follows the immortal scribe Enoch as he's sent by God to find 7 fallen angels and save humanity from a great flood triggered by the Council of Heaven. I mean, Jesus Christ, it could just be a Dogma side story almost.
Yeah.
But yeah, gameplay has Enoch platforming through 2D and 3D levels, which vary in presentation and art style, all these other things. I played it back in the day, completed it. It got a re-release for the Switch, but I think it was only released in Japan, which is a shame because it's kind of like, it feels like a cross between Devil May Cry and old school God of War. It's a legitimately fantastic game. And while it has no sense of humor, it does tick a lot of the religious boxes at least. So as I said, you take the tone, you take the gameplay style, you only change it to Bartleby and Loki as they fight their way through heaven. Again, it would have to be a prequel, I think, because I'm not sure if a direct, Dogma to video game kind of translation works, but it is what it is.
No, I'm with. So I've got two. One could be a direct Dogma to video game translation, and the other one could be it's going to be about the angels. So the one about the angels, for me, you've already said it, but it's the DMC Devil May Cry Ninja Theories. Yeah. I think that would be great.
You've gone for Ninja Theory version, not
Ninja
the Capcom
Theories
version.
Devil May Cry. No,
I'm glad. Honestly, I'm glad you're giving it a bit of love because that game got so unfairly slaughtered because fucking Dante was given dark hair instead of his usual blonde mop. That game was really fucking good. I'm not saying it's necessarily better than the Capcom games because I love the Capcom games as well, but it was a genuinely fantastic alternative and a brilliant take from a fantastic studio.
I love the different take and the different gameplay that you had with DMC. I thought it was
totally. I think you're actually right in terms of like the writing stuff. It's probably closer to Dogma than the Capcom version is because it's much more Japanese centric, I suppose.
And my direct correlation film game, would be a text-based game.
No, fair enough.
Yeah. I mean, with Kevin Smith, which is nothing but exposition, it would be a text-based game.
Yeah. Like the old school, like The Walking Dead kind of style ones. Yeah. That actually makes loads more sense. We'll go with that. So all that's left is scores and recommendations. So for me, it's pretty easy. It's still a 4. It's always been a 4. It has its problems, but even I was worried it might feel a little bit rough going back to this film because I haven't seen it for like 10, 15 years easy. It still looks great. It's still wonderfully acted for the most part. The dialogue's still classic Kevin Smith. And sure, it has its foibles, but it remains a great watch. And I think it's very easy to recommend still. You kind of have to be a Kevin Smith. I would actually say, of all the Kevin Smith films, this is probably the easiest to recommend.
You don't have to be a Kevin Smith fan to watch this. No.
You could be a hipster and say, "Oh, you should go see Clerks." I'm not going to tell fucking Dave in work. I don't want Dave. We know a Dave, but anyway, some random dude. Oh, you've got to go watch 1994's black and white Clerks. It's not for everyone. Whereas this. It kind of is. And I'm not going back on my idea that this was his play for the mainstream. It's just that one of the more easily likable films, and you just don't need to be in on the whole Kevin Smith joke thing. It doesn't feel as aggressively 90s as, say, Chasing Amy does. Yeah, I think this is a super easy recommendation.
As we've already said, it's not a traditional Kevin Smith film that he's done previously. So even though it's not a push,
despite the fact that it totally feels like, it's that weird thing. It both doesn't feel like his other movies in terms of what it's going for, what it's trying to achieve, but at the same time, you listen to the dialogue, you're like, well, this is pure Kevin Smith.
Yeah.
So it oddly ticks both boxes.
It's a 4 for me as well, which is the second 4 of the year. And whether or not
it feels like I've given like 15 4s on the bounce now. I'm just gonna have to watch a film where I'm just like something terrible or at least a 5-star.
It's all right. I'll pull out Garbage Pail Kids soon.
That'd do it. Yeah. That'd fucking do it for sure. Or actually, my choice for next week, I think might actually do it. Although I'm saying that I've done nothing to back that up because I know jack shit about it.
Oh, I'm intrigued, but hang on, we haven't finished this episode yet.
That's what I mean.
Would I review? Sorry, I would review. I've done it. Would I refer? What do we say?
Recommend.
Fuck it up. You totally took me off my track, and I just completely forgot where I was going. Would I recommend? Yes, I would. I would recommend it to anyone. I wouldn't even say it's a Kevin Smith film or anything at that point. I would just say just watch Dogma.
Yeah, and plus it's got like big names. Like if you could sell it as it's got Matt Damon and Ben Affleck in it, and it's like they were coming off a pretty hot streak back then. Like they were obviously they're massive stars now, but they were massive stars like coming into this. Like, what was it? Damon, he was coming off Good Will Hunting, Saving Private Ryan, Rounders, okay, maybe, and he was going into the talented Mr. Ripley. And Affleck is coming off Armageddon, Forces of Nature, Shakespeare in Love, and it might not be everybody's favorite film, but Phantoms. And as we all know, Affleck was the bomb in Phantom show. So yeah, they were like big stars then. They're obviously even bigger stars now. So if somebody didn't know anything about this film, you'd be like, dude, it's a Ben Affleck and Matt Damon film. It's an easy sell.
Speaking of Ben Affleck and Matt Damon, did you ever, and I'm going off the rails a little bit here before you say next week's film, did you know they did a TV show called Project Greenlight?
No idea.
So it was I think it was a TV show. It was a competition where directors would pitch a film that they wanted, and then they'd go through like an X Factor style thing. And at the end of it, the winner would have their film greenlit and released. Now, the reason I mention that is because I'm just trying to see if we can pick it up in the UK. The winner was a film called Feast. Have you ever heard of Feast?
Nope.
About a bunch of people in a bar that get attacked by monsters. Now, this was produced by Ben Affleck and Matt Damon. And it was released in 2005, and it's a fucking great film. It's just a nonsense. It's in the vein of What Did We Do where they were Demon Knights.
Oh, see, I was thinking, did you ever see the film Green Room with Patrick Stewart, where it's the Nazis?
Room. Absolutely love Green Room.
That was just immediately what came to mind. That'd be a great one to revisit, because I watched that in 2015, but I haven't seen it since.
No, so at some point this year we're gonna do Feast. You've just made me realize we're gonna do Feast. So
Feast, what year was it? Sorry, Feast the movie.
Feast. It was 2005. We're not going to do the sequels, Feast 2, Sloppy Seconds, or Feast 3, The Happy Finish, Christ. Which I have watched.
No, of course you have. Of course you have.
But we will do the original Feast.
I'm gonna have to look into that, because I've never even heard of it. But what an odd way to end our Dogma podcast, talking about the movie Feast, which I'm guessing that 99.9% of people have never fucking heard of. But a movie people definitely have heard of, but one I bizarrely haven't seen. And that's the reason we're doing this. It's no great... I'm not even sure if I want to see it, but I was giving my friend shit for not having seen Die Hard until recently, which I think is totally fair play, because who the fuck hasn't seen Die Hard? But then he gave me shit for not having seen 1984's The Never-Ending Story. And suddenly I was like, that's pretty reasonable as well, because especially as someone who's such a big fan of 80s cinema, I mean, I know we've done more modern films, but we're basically doing an 80s cinema podcast with over 100 episodes, and I haven't seen the Never-Ending Story. So it's like, I've got to sort this out, and the podcast seems the perfect place to do it. So going to watch The Never-Ending Story next week, and I have no idea how I'm going to react to it, because I'm like, oh, it's a kid's film, whatever. I'm like, it's directed by Wolfgang Petersen. Like, he's got pedigree, and obviously it's lived on in the mind of a lot of people adore this film. And all I've kept seeing bizarrely over Christmas is, like, maybe you mention something or you click on something once, and then it, like, the algorithm kicks in and it just keeps feeding into you.
I guess. Have you seen the picture of the horse in the mud?
The fucking horse dying. And I'd heard about that before, but all Christmas, because I mentioned it to a friend when we were talking about him not having seen Die Hard, and it's like, this amongst my group of friends is similar to what was the film we did for the Wes Craven one we did for Halloween? The People Under the Stairs.
Yeah.
Like, I was always like the movie guy growing up, but it was a movie that bizarrely all my friends had seen and I'd never watched until we did on the podcast. And this is the other movie. It feels like everyone I know has watched The Never-Ending Story, and obviously had a bunch of sequels, blah, blah, blah. I've just never seen it. And when I say I've never seen it, I've never seen like a second of it. I've seen a clip or a gif of the kid with the horse. I know shit about this film. I know there's like a giant rug dog thing, but I've never seen 5 minutes of this film on TV. It's completely passed me by. So I'm kind of looking forward to seeing this now, because I know a lot of people love it. But as how I'm going to react to watching it for the first time in 2024 as a 41-year-old man, I have no fucking idea. But
so I've seen it. Seen it once. I've never watched it again. I've never thought I wanted to watch it again. I'd rather watch Flight of the Navigator. So don't know if I'm looking forward to this rewatch.
How old were you when you watched it, out of interest?
The 80s, probably. When was it released? Like 1980?
84.
84, so I would have watched it probably late 80s, 88, 89.
Yeah, but it's one of the, like you said, it didn't click for you then, but it's been long enough that you might feel differently about it now. You might watch it in a completely different way.
Probably.
As I said, this isn't directed by it's clearly got talent involved. Yeah, I mean, you see, like, you're setting out your stall early doors, like, this is going to be a piece of shit. But hey, I'm going in with an open mind. As I said, I've got nothing to work with other than a potentially dead horse and a flying rug dog thing. So, hey, we'll find out next week, won't we? That's the point of the podcast. But yeah, so thank you for listening to Dogma. Please do join us for, well, actually, I'm telling people to join us next week for the Never Ending Story. Unless you love that film, you can have me clueless about it and you fucking hate it. But I don't know. We'll see how it goes. Anything else before we wrap it up?
No, I just want to say, which usually gives us good episodes.
Oh, it's usually plenty to talk about. So yeah, we'll deal with that next week anyway. So yeah, I've been Liam, this has been Rob, you've been listening to Hey You Guys podcast, and we will see you next week. Oh, and before I forget, where can folk reach us if they were so inclined to?
Well, you can actually reach us on Hey You Guys 80s at Facebook, Instagram, and on Twitter. But if you want to send us a mail, do heyyouguys80s@gmail.com. Send us in your recommendations. Send us in your thoughts about any of the episodes. Just literally talk to us. We'll have a one-sided talk with you on the podcast.
Yeah. We're nice folk. Get in touch. But no, cheers, guys. Bye-bye.
Cheers, guys. Bye now.